Hey everyone, it's Brenda back with another episode of Three Uniques. I'm really excited to introduce you to Steve Rio. Hey Steve, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. So Steve, just so everyone knows, is the co-founder and CEO of Nature of Work. And he lives on Bowen Island in British Columbia here, which is about 20 minutes from downtown Vancouver by ferry. So Steve, tell us a little bit more about yourself and tell us about Nature of Work.
Sure. It's interesting right now. I'm not exactly sure how to talk about myself because I'm definitely in a year of transition. I've just sold a business that I'd been in for 10 years. That was BrightWeb. And transitioned to Nature of Work, which I've been working on for the last couple of years. I'm doing some other nascent projects. So I feel like I'm just in a open discovery mode right now. So that's a little bit about me. But Nature of Work is basically a performance and wellness program that helps people, I think, build better habits around their time and their attention and their energy. And I think for a lot of us, adapting to the new normal of work, and even just anyone who's been working in a technology environment for a long time knows that it's getting harder and harder to focus. Our days are getting longer. A lot of us are feeling a lot of exhaustion, anxiety, burnout. So I've built a program that helps people combat that and build better habits, better routines. And I built it for myself to begin with, because when I moved to Bowen Island, I thought I was going to have the best focus days of my life. And I realized that as long as you're in front of a computer, it doesn't really matter where you are. It's easy to get distracted. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm all about. And then I'm also doing a bunch of early work in the psychedelic space as well.
Which is really cool. And we were talking about that just before we press play.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think earlier conversations when you were starting Nature of Work, I remember being part of a beta test around some of your online training programs, pulling from your experience from BrightWeb, which is a tech company that you had, as you mentioned. You saw things with your employees about how they were responding to work or working in remote situations. Anything about this year, because everyone is having to pivot to this obviously being a way to communicate and work through work. I mean, your environment at BrightWeb was very much like this all the time.
That's right.
Anything that you sort of noticed as far as how organizations are adjusting smoothly or not smoothly this year?
Yeah, well, I think, yeah. So BrightWeb was remote for the last five plus years. So we've been thinking about this for a long time. And in the last few years of my time at BrightWeb, I was starting to see how technology was, on the one hand, empowering us in many ways, but also really easily distracting us and driving down productivity. So things like Slack can be great, but if it's always on and you're getting blipped every 45 seconds, which is actually the average of how often we're distracted when we're in front of a computer, it's really hard to get anything done. And when you're not doing meaningful work and you can't get anything done, your quality of life goes down, your engagement with your work goes down. So I was just seeing I was seeing anxiety and stress going up, and it wasn't it just felt like it was just going up, and there wasn't any good reason other than I think people didn't have good habits around their work. And so I've been thinking about this for a long time, and then watching this year and watching all of these companies go through that, it's been really interesting, because I think a lot of companies were starting to think about how to move towards remote work, but this sort of threw everybody into the mix kind of instantly overnight. And I think it's definitely been a challenge for people, because it's a whole different ballgame when you're in a remote environment in terms of social engagement and culture, all these types of things. So it's definitely, I've seen the challenge. I think that one of the things we may not sort of acknowledge enough is that there's just an underlying level of stress right now, because people are not sure what their jobs are going to do or their companies are going to do, or what's happening with things in the world. There's a lot of social unrest and these things. And that just is like a level of noise in the background of your mind that we have to try and push through all the time. And I think in terms of mental health, we're just seeing the effects of that right now. And I think we're going to see that in a big way into 2021. So I think it's a really key time for companies and for individuals to look for ways to support those things.
For sure. Yeah. The vibration or the reverberation of the effects of this year are going to definitely
Big
go
time.
next year. Yeah.
It's like anything. When you oftentimes you experience something, but you almost get an adrenaline rush, you kind of build up a resilience to it for a number of months, but that can only last so long. It's like if you have a big project, you suddenly get the energy to push through it, but at the end of the project, you get sick or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Studying for your final exams.
Yeah, you push through it, and then it ends, or it winds down, and realize, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted and
Yeah.
I'm actually super burnt out. So
Right. Yeah.
I hope that people can find support for that. And that's what Nature of Work is all about.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
near the end, we'll ask you where to find you and all that sort of
Cool.
stuff, and where people can find out information. We'll make sure we tag that. So we're here to learn about your 3 uniques today. So
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm Jazz. Let's hear them.
Okay. So my 3 uniques, number one is I've adjusted my entire life to be entirely focused on upgrading human consciousness. And I'll explain what that means. But that's something that I'm just really passionate about, is helping people raise their consciousness. Number two is I've always been purpose-driven, impact-driven. It's just been something that I can't, even if I wanted to avoid it, I can't. So I'm super driven by impact. And 3 is I'm a technologist. I've been in technology my entire life and grew up around technology, but I'm a technologist who spends a lot of time talking to people about the risks and traps of technology. So it's kind of an interesting, I used to be an evangelist, and now I'm much more of a skeptic slash, I don't know, pragmatist humanist, something like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, let's take it up to the top. Number 1.
All right. So upgrading human consciousness, this is, so I've been in social impact my whole life, but I've really honed in on what really drives me. And I've just realized that what gets me most excited is when I see people just open up to new possibilities and realize, just have a new perspective or a new lens on their life. And I think a lot about consciousness right now, because I think the world is getting much more complex, much more interconnected. And if we're going to survive and thrive as a species right now, I think it's super key that we upgrade our ability to sense make, our ability to think about the world, think about ourselves, and not get caught up in a lot of what's happening. Like, we're seeing a lot of this. The internet has given us so much access to information, right? And it's been a real test. And it's a test that we're in many ways failing, I think, right now, because you see the extreme ideology and you see the tribalism and you see a lot of polarization happening. And I think it's really key for us to be able to rise above that and recognize a new definition of truth, a new understanding of what's real in the world, and reconnect with ourselves as human beings and one another. So that's what I think a lot about these days. And it's really the lens by which I look through all the work I do with Nature of Work and the work I do in the psychedelic space.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to definitely, we'll dive into a little bit more around the Nature of Work, because I really loved the snapshot that I was able to experience when you sent it out to me. And your second unique. Yeah.
So I've been driven by purpose and impact really my whole life. And I remember when I started BrightWeb, I left an agency that really just did corporate work, and started focusing with nonprofits and working in various types of social enterprises. And I remember at the time, that was in the early days. Like, I think these days, young people who are starting business, which I love, are all talking about social impact. Like, I think it's becoming much more common. But when I started in my business life, that wasn't so common. Finding language for that wasn't so common. But it's something that just really drives me. I've actually been, fairly successful as an entrepreneur. I've made a little money, but nothing I've ever done has started with money. It's never been about the money. And I've actually made a rule for myself now, which helps me kind of make sense of opportunities as they come at me. So it's basically that anytime somebody approaches me with a collaboration, with a partnership, with an investment, anything like that, if my first instinct about what they've just told me is money, then it's an automatic no for me. And the reason for that is that I know if my first instinct was money, then my first instinct wasn't, oh, that's such a neat project that's going to make such a big difference. I don't mind making money, but I know that if I enter into something because of the money, I'm really going to quickly be bored and not engaged, and it's not my highest power. So,
right.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's great to have that filter or that lens that you can look through things and make the right choices.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It makes for a really fun, connected life where I feel deeply passionate and engaged and grateful to be doing the things I'm doing every day. So
awesome. And then your third unique. Yeah.
So this is the sort of shift that I've gone through over the last few years, where I would say as recent as 5 or 6 years ago, I was very much, I think, a tech evangelist, maybe a few more years than that, but a few experiences I've had over the last number of years have really shifted that. One was having a teenage daughter and watching her engage with technology. She's 22 years of age now. So she was really the first wave of teenagers who had all the devices.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, we weren't really thinking yet about, films like The Social Dilemma, which I highly recommend everybody watch. Things like that weren't out. We weren't talking about addiction, tech addiction. We weren't talking about the negative effects on emotional well-being, or, what social media can kind of do in terms of our ability to make sense of the world. And so watching her experience of that was the first signal to me that something might be off here in the way the internet is shaping itself. And then watching my staff and watching myself and experiencing my lack of ability to focus, my team's anxiety, just the general lack of people's ability to make sense of the world. And you look at what's happening right now in democracies, and like you look at the US election and the amount of misinformation being pumped into into their internet, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And even by mainstream outlets are being driven to the sort of lowest common denominator, just driving clickbait headlines, even the New York Times and people like that. So
right.
I guess I spend a lot of time these days trying to help people understand how to use technology as a tool and realize all of the value that it can bring, and not deny that in any way, but to understand the difference there. Because when we're working on a computer as our primary, connection to the world,
mm-hmm.
that means we're in an environment where there is a tremendous amount of distractions, and our mobile phones are right beside us. And that's another place where those devices have been, designed to be as addictive as possible. And so I think it's just really important that people recognize the difference and build healthy habits around their technology so that they're leveraging them in all the great ways they can, but they're also not getting caught in traps where their time and attention is literally just being stolen from them. So.
Right.
Yeah, I think that for me has just been a driving force. And I feel like 4 or 5 years ago when I started really talking about this, a lot of people thought I was crazier than I am now. And honestly, The Social Dilemma has been great. And films like that and people talking about these things, Tristan Harris and other excellent thinkers talking about this has been great, because I guess I feel like I have some backup now, which is good.
I think it aligns with your second unique, which is around purpose, right? So,
Totally.
I mean, technology is great, but if it's being manipulated to, influence my buying decisions as a consumer, which we all know marketing has been doing since marketing existed. So, I watched The Social Dilemma, and I know that there were some things like, oh, did you know that it's doing this to you and driving your consumer habits? And I'm like, technology or a billboard, whatever it could be, a piece of print ad, it's always been doing that. So if we're just thinking that technology is just unrooted this whole conspiracy theory about marketing agencies, it's like, please, but I think that the algorithm, right, knowing your habits and studying your habits, it's almost like an invasion of privacy. And versus before, it's like randomly I might be driving down this road and seeing a billboard and it's all random, versus now it's like deliberate, it's intentional, it's that manipulation. So I think it kind of goes back to your purpose about building businesses or building great websites when you were leading BrightWeb for good, versus like just the end result of making money.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It also ties back to my first, which is around raising consciousness and helping people sense make in the world.
Right.
Like, I think that what you just mentioned around marketing and things, that's one aspect that, yes, has always been around. It's highly sophisticated now, and it's the biggest supercomputers in the world against you. So that's one thing, but that to me is less important, because actually sometimes those recommendations are great. I'm researching certain musical instruments, and then I'm getting recommended really interesting musical instruments. So
you're like, thank you, that's safe.
That part's
research. Yeah.
That part's okay. I think the part I'm more concerned about is the algorithms pushing us into corners and making us believe, once we see one sort of thing and interact with that thing on YouTube or something like that, that's all the internet wants to show us. So it really quickly drives us into a corner, with the intention of all these sites is just to keep our attention as long as possible. And the cheapest way to do that is to, play on our fear, our anger,
right.
Sexual excitement, these kind of things. And that's just, again, it's like the overall intent is actually fairly benign. It's to sell us advertising and to show us products. But to keep our attention, it's driving us into these corners of fear and anger. And that's what I think we're seeing a lot of with really important social issues that we should be talking about in a more meaningful way, getting driven to these sort of polarized corners where we can't talk anymore. So that to me is much more important, because that's sort of the foundation of our society, is that we can disagree or agree on things, but still respect one another.
Right. I think what I found really helpful when I went through your beta test around nature of work, now it's like obviously launched, but when I was going through in the early stages, I learned a lot, like just as far as, you know, being able to, you know, program this device for me, for my good, versus like all the default programming that's in there that Apple or Sony has put into their products, or sorry, Samsung has put into their products, like just by default, like you buy this product and by default, it's going to like all these notifications are going to go off. And I remember taking your course, and, you know, you can turn off your notifications, you can monitor your device usage, you can set times, start times and end times when your computer or your device is going to turn on in the morning. Never knowing that before. And then I, you know, took your online workshop and learned those things. And I still have that in practice now. And I find it hugely beneficial, because now I'm in choice about my phone and what I want to receive from it and my devices, versus it just sort of like I'm being placated to, or it's kind of like, you know, like the limbic brain just sort of taking over. You're just in neutral and everything's just being fed to you. Now it's like, I'm going to choose to go to this site. I'm going to choose to open up Facebook or Twitter or wherever. Even though I'm not on those ones anymore. I don't know why I said those. I've limited myself to like Instagram and LinkedIn. That's it. So
what you just said is perfect, right? It's about being in choice and being intentional about, you know, if I'm just scrolling mindlessly because I'm just sort of sucked in and I just waste 45 minutes, that's not great. If I go on there to check in with a couple of friends that I'm interested in seeing what they're up to and sending a few messages, that's a totally different experience, and I chose to do that.
Right.
But learning how to do that, because unfortunately these devices and the apps that are on them, they're all in a race for our attention. Right. So we have to, just being aware of that is super key.
So if you had an opportunity to go back in time to say, like, I don't know, like your 25-year-old self, what would be one piece of advice you'd give them?
My 25-year-old self. I think I'd tell my 25-year-old self. So when I was 25, 26, I kind of in those years when I turned 30, that was a transition where I was actually a musician all through those years. And so I never went to university. I've learned everything I've learned from self-study, reading books, the internet. And, but as I was in that time frame and I was transitioning into being a business person or an entrepreneur, I really felt, I didn't realize how much I didn't give myself enough credit for what I had learned by running bands and producing music and organizing shows and all these things. Like I had learned a lot about creativity, about engaging with people, about public speaking and you know, all those kind of things. And I think I just really felt like I was way behind everybody who had been to business school. And I think I just, I wish I had honored the path that I was on more at that time, and just really, because now I look back and I wouldn't trade that for anything. I had such an exciting time doing all of that. I learned a lot. You know, I did a lot of things that a lot of people would love to do and have never done in their life. So I think that's one thing for me. The second thing that I would do is remind myself that there's lots of people out there who have done the things that I'm about to do before, and to reach out more. Because I think I've started to do that now, but I was really, I wasn't good at that. Like the way I see young people, like the sharp young people these days, and they're reaching out to me and they're reaching out to people and asking for just 30 minutes on Zoom and this, and building those relationships. And man, I wish I'd, you know, obviously it would have been different. There was no internet like that, but I wish I had done that more.
Right. Yeah. Knock on doors more, pick up the phone more. Back
totally.
in the days. Yeah. Before the
when you're an entrepreneur, it's like everything you're thinking about doing, somebody has done before. Like there's very little that we're doing that no one's done. And usually those people, if you're, you know, sharp and you respect their time and things, they love talking about it and they're happy to do so. So.
Right. Okay. Good advice. Good advice for your younger self and for others that are thinking down that similar path. And then when was the last time you did something for the first time?
Let me see. The last time that I did something for the first time, it would have been a few days ago. I'm constantly doing things for the first time because amongst all the other things I'm doing in business and whatnot, I'm also learning how to do plumbing and electrical in my home and do all the carpentry. I've done huge renovations, and I just ran power lines to a building for the first time. I was digging trenches and running power lines. So like right now
Every day is the first day.
I'm like in an overwhelming amount of learning right now. So actually I thrive in that environment, and this year has been like the fire hose full on for me. So
right.
I forget what the little project I did just this past weekend is. I don't know why I'm blanking on it, but it was completely new and I'd never done it before.
Okay. All right. Well, I've seen on Instagram your sauna that you've been building, and
oh yeah, the sauna's done.
I think a chicken coop too.
The chicken coop, the sauna was a chicken coop, and it was completely converted. And it was completely converted. And now I'm about to build a cold plunge right next to it, and I just ordered all the components to assemble a cold plunge. So that's my next learning.
Neat. Okay. Very cool. So Steve, where can we find you if we need to find you?
So you can find me on the evil Instagram at Steve Rio. That's my personal handle. You can find Nature of Work at natureofwork.co. That's the website and the Instagram handle. Yeah, those are the best spots. I'm on Twitter, but I'm not really on Twitter. So I'm at Steve Rio on the internet.
Okay, great.
Generally.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Steve, thanks so much for being on 3 Innings today. We really appreciate connecting with you and hearing about like kind of what makes you tick and how they all connect together, because I think they definitely do. Thank you for your time today.
No, my pleasure, Brenda. Thank you.
And for everyone that's listening and checking in with Steve and learning from him about his 3 Innings, just get out there, share your 3 Innings with the world. I always say there's 7.5 billion people on this planet. Somebody needs what you've got. So keep sharing them. And thanks again, Steve. Take care.
Pleasure.